Alrighty, welcome everyone to today's session. We're talking with Jareth on getting into IT and what recruiters are looking for. Jareth has helped me with jobs in the past, and he's a very knowledgeable dude and a great dude. So very happy to have you here, mate. And I'll hand it over to you.
Mate, thank you so much. I suppose just for the record, guys, I didn't pay David to say that, so I actually feel much loved more than I do from my own manager. So thanks so much, mate.
You're welcome.
I suppose a little bit about me. So I work at Humanized Group. So we're a recruitment boutique agency. What we do is we only look after IT. And if you put us together with our sibling business, they're more in the dev, UX, UI, digital marketing space. We're a pretty decent, solid recruitment agency here in Brisbane, but we do have some operations down south under the JDP brand. I suppose a little bit about my kind of background in recruitment. Does anyone actually know what recruiters do, how they work, anything like that? Speak now, forever hold your peace.
Anyone? We've got one in the comments says headhunt.
Yeah, okay. A little bit like that. So essentially what recruitment consultants do is we're a fee-for-service provider. So we find clients candidates, but we can also reverse market, and we work with candidates that we really like, and we can see, I suppose, helping to add value there as well. So we represent them to our customer base as well. So essentially, we basically get paid from an employer for helping find that person and transitioning into their business. There's also contracts and labour hire, which is more kind of just getting somebody to come in on a short-term basis to, I suppose, resolve a solution, which is more going to be about getting somebody in to, I don't know, cover a service desk or work on a project and that type of stuff. A little bit about my background. I've come into recruitment somebody who wants to actually do recruitment, which is actually quite unique. A lot of people, or a lot of recruiters, I should say, have found their way into recruitment. Somebody's recommended it to them and they've kind of fallen in that way. I really liked the look of the pace and I suppose just kind of doing different things on a daily basis. So I've come in from a labour hire construction background, so dealing with tradies and getting like bums on seats there and getting people to help out in construction sites. I've moved across into accounting, financing, did a bit of warehousing recruitment, and made my way into IT recruitment, which I've spent the last, I'd probably say 7 and a bit years. So I suppose recruitment, it is a very, very similar kind of methodology with whatever you recruit for. But I think IT is probably the most difficult that I had to get my head around it. Primarily based on, obviously, technologies are always ever evolving, but IT, the landscape is so quite broad as well. So I've basically worked for large, massive global recruitment agencies. And I've kind of taken a step to a different direction, working for a boutique recruitment consultancy. So it's more about, I suppose, being embedded in the Brisbane market and working with engineers and also employers just around helping people transition into the best role for them and helping employers find some great people as well. So I suppose, like David's mentioned, what do recruiters really look for when we're either looking at your CV or when we're speaking to you as well? I suppose if we start right from the very left-hand side, we're looking for people who are very career-orientated. So these people, obviously, it's how you kind of you live it and you breathe it, and how you come across around your communication skills as well. Which kind of is covered a little bit more about the skills above. So your soft skills, emotional intelligence, active listening, realistic expectations of the role. So if I was to break that down a little bit, in recruitment, we're kind of assessing straight away from the get-go, from the first conversation or from the first instant message that you send us or email, whatever it is. We're kind of assessing going, okay, do they have good communication style? Can they spell correctly? Is everything there grammatically? Are we listening to their tone of voice? Do they sound quite engaged? I've had candidates over my 10 and a bit years where you speak to them and it just sounds like they've woken out of bed, or they're that stressed speaking to somebody and they're not usually used to. to speaking to somebody, and it's really come across that way. So it's more being mindful of how you come across at every interaction. The emotional intelligence, that's probably been more of a bigger focus, I'd say, over the last 5 and a bit years that I've noticed. So it's more or less, when I say emotional intelligence, it's picking up on certain cues. If somebody's upset, really kind of going, okay, somebody's upset, why is that? And being able to react to that. When I look at active listening, this is more kind of focused around when I've spoken to candidates and I've asked them pretty open-ended questions, and they might give me a closed response. So if I say, what type of position are you looking for? And their response is yes, I'm like, well, you didn't really actively listen to my question. Another situation would be a general question that any of you guys will probably get, especially if you're going into IT support. Tell us a time when you dealt with an angry customer, what you've learned from that, what you've done to resolve the issue. And a lot of people will tend to kind of not follow the STAR principles, and they'll talk about what they'll do, but they never talk about who the person was that was upset, what they've actually done to resolve the issue, and what the result was of that. They just walk them through the methodology. Realistic expectations of the role. So that's quite an interesting one. When I've spoken to some people, younger candidates can be sometimes a little bit cocky, or they might not be aware of what expectations they should be looking at. Some people have over-realistic expectations when it comes to salary. So instantly in my mind, I'm like, they're asking for way too much. I don't think I can help them. And if they're not willing to listen, or if they're not willing to see, I suppose, where they would be kind of ranked in the market, their other competitors, something that I can't really help them out with. And it's just pretty much a, look, sorry, mate, I can't help you out. Here's some information, but if you can't change that, I can't help you out. And that can also relate back to transferable skill sets. So obviously, if you don't really have much experience, and we can definitely cover this part towards the end of the presentation, it's more or less being aware of when to kind of look for junior roles and not to apply for senior roles. Appreciate you might have some exposure in a test environment at home and other things, but a lot of the time employers are looking for somebody who's tried and tested, and that's where we kind of have our value add. We're finding people with that. But if you're expecting an established role straight off the get-go without having any of that experience, it's going to be pretty difficult to represent you. I've also got here confident, not cocky. So for me, that's actually something that I've seen from time and time again, not just from people coming into the IT market. This can be even seasonal managers, engineers as well. I think sometimes if they come across as quite cocky, and that's pretty much where they're kind of dictating to me things, or if I'm giving them constructive feedback and they're not taking that on board, or they just have an attitude problem, I'm not really going to be interested. And I know if I put them forward to my clients, the employers of the Brisbane market, that's going to reflect badly on me, but also them as well. And that's where I'm like, look, unfortunately, it's probably best that we don't continue on our partnership. Obviously, there is a fine line between cockiness and confidence. So for me, confidence is more going to be about having a good tone of voice and being able to speak comfortably and actually holding a conversation. It's also about knowing who you are, what you want for a new job, what your expectations are, where you want to go with your career. There's been so many people, when I look at juniors coming into the market, where they kind of give me a textbook response when I say, where do you want to go in your career? And they're like, I just want some experience. And I get that you're hungry and you're eager, but if I had $1 for every new person that come into IT has given me that response, everyone is literally part of the crowd and no one really stands out. The people that talk about what they want, where they want to go, and having a little bit of an idea of that plan, they're the ones that basically stick out. Straight talking, that's another important trait. I feel that when you work with a recruiter, you'll either get one or two recruiters. You'll get a recruitment agent and a recruitment consultant. And I think there's a big difference between the two. I think an agent will be very transactional. They will be more kind of using you as a KPI. It will be basically, you meet the position description, yes, no, awesome, we'll quickly send you over to the business and hopefully get some money out of you. Where a recruitment consultant will act a bit differently. It's pretty much working with you to say, hey, is this realistic? Let's coach you around these things and get you ready for an interview, and actually trying to get you the position itself. They might go to market and actually try and find something for you. But it's more kind of thinking about that partnership around, okay, if I'm partnering with this person, if they're going to do all this stuff for me, I need to make sure that I'm going to be on board. And I'm not just saying yes to appease them. I'm actually going to be partnering with them. So if they're saying, hey, I'm going to get you this interview and I'm going to do everything that I can to get you the interview, you need to say, yes, okay, I'm going to back that up. I'm going to go to the interview. Not, yeah, I just had another thought about it and I've changed my mind, because that impacts the relationship there. Other areas as well. So quite often, especially in this day and era, and I think this is just mainly with how we've been brought up in school and the ease it is around communication and technology, a lot of people are very much one-sided, where they shoot off an email and you're not getting anything instantaneous and you expect you're going to get something back. And I think the candidates that have stood out to me are the ones that build rapport and you can actually have a conversation and you know them on somewhat of a personal level. So if I'm looking at somebody who sees an ad and calls up and has some good questions to ask, they're somebody who I'm like, they're really inquisitive. They're really cool. They're very personable. That's somebody who I definitely want to try and help find a job for. Where if you're just applying for a lot of roles, and that's fine as well, definitely make sure that you're writing down which business and roles that you're applying for, because when people call you back, at least you know what you're looking at. But if you're not making any contact, if you're not reaching out to them, I just think that you're potentially shooting yourself in the foot. With the market as well, I don't know if you guys know this, but obviously 2020 was terrible in recruitment. I was actually looking at starting an OnlyFans because recruitment went absolutely horrendous. I'm actually joking. No one would want to pay to see me anyway on OnlyFans, but obviously I was like, what do I do? If we kind of fast track to more towards, let's say, June, July, things started picking up, and then 2021, oh my God, boom. Pendulum swung the other way. Candidates had most control and power. 2022, definitely the case. And then when we look at August 2022, things started to kind of wind back a little bit. Obviously, with what's happening in the world, I believe the whole invasion of Ukraine gets thrown into there a fair bit. Interest rates predominantly as well. Confidence in the market is starting to dwindle. So the pendulum swinging back to what it was like before COVID. Where this all fits into people like yourselves coming into IT, wanting your first gig potentially, this is where you need to think, okay, how do I stand out? Because if you have X amount of people entering into IT, you need to think as to how you're going to stand out there. And also, if you're just applying for jobs just willy-nilly and hoping for a callback, if we go back to 2022, that would have worked. You probably would have got a callback straight away. But now there's a lot more candidates coming back into the market. That's a lot more accessible. So you need to think about obviously going the extra mile. And I think if you stand out to your recruiters, it makes your life easier. Another one that I'd like to discuss, and this is actually quite an interesting thing that I learned. This was probably back in 2018 when I spoke to a managed services company. Before I go into that, actually, does anyone know what a managed services does?
Got some people typing.
10 points to Gryffindor, if anyone knows.
I might interject just before. They provide services
I'll let you
to
kind of
businesses.
reach them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially. So managed services, what they do is they provide IT services, whether it's project or business as usual, like your break fix type of stuff. They can be run many different ways. They're quite interesting. But managed services, a customer of mine at the time, they actually sat down and said, we actually brought somebody brand new into IT. They've done a degree. No, sorry, it was a master's. On paper, looks great. Good attitude, got them in, but the concern we had is that when we needed them to, I don't know, hook up 2 monitors, they didn't know what to do. Didn't last that long, unfortunately. We need somebody to who could actually stand on their own 2 feet to a degree, but kind of come in and just do some basic hardware and software support. After that, he actually hired the next person, which came with, I think, a Cert 4 or maybe a diploma in IT. That was probably from TAFE. And he said there was just chalk and cheese. And that's because your certifications, your diplomas are more focused around, how would you say, sorry, mate, I've gone blank. It's more focused around the practicality of things, and you're getting some form of hands-on experience, where when you're looking at degrees and that type of stuff, that tends to be very much theoretical. So yes, you kind of know a process, but you're not actually doing it to a degree. And I tend to find that when I'm speaking to most hiring managers, yes, degrees and masters are cool, but if you're getting the certs and that type of stuff, they appreciate the value for those. I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about industry certs as well towards the end, because I think that they can be quite good. There can be a little bit of a knowledge gap between not having any, I suppose, certification for or whatever it is at TAFE or degree at all versus doing industry courts. I think you need some fundamentals there, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that towards the end. When we're looking at CVs and LinkedIn's, a lot of the time I tend to see a few main red flags and errors. CVs, sometimes they're just not up to date, or the formatting is absolutely atrocious. It could also be more about spelling as well. And I suppose to an employer, they're like, well, if they need to have documentation in part of their role, they can't even do that to their CV. What message does that send? They also could think that the person's being a bit lazy. Another trend I tend to find is LinkedIn as well. Definitely use that, guys. Make sure that you put down open opportunities on LinkedIn. On your CV, you can actually update your CV and put it into Seek, the database, and that's where all employers will tend to go to look for what candidates have updated their profile. But I tend to find as well, if an employer is quite cluey and savvy, what tends to happen is they will look at your CV on your LinkedIn and they'll kind of just go, right, is everything across the CV matching their LinkedIn profile, and vice versa. Another one as well, guys, which I haven't listed, and it does come up in IT occasionally. I think in other areas it definitely does. My missus works for a real estate recruitment agency, so they are very much focused around social media and perception and your branding. And I think you need to be mindful of, obviously, the content that you're posting online. I've heard a few doozies over the years of people posting around very political focused things, or very things that are, you basically go, you wouldn't kind of bring that up in a general conversation with somebody who you wouldn't know. So just being mindful of, obviously, how much content you show as well. I think another thing as well, just to finish off around what we look for, is I think it's more about feedback. If you can kind of go away and learn and ask for advice, and I've worked with a few people that have come into IT beforehand, I've given them advice, and they've actually come back to me 6-12 months later, and that's actually really cool, because it shows to me that they've actually been able to go away and practice what I've preached. They've been able to come back and they're really ready to go. So whether it's from a recruiter or even some of the line managers that you interview with, definitely ask for feedback as to what you can do to make your life easier, and actually execute. There's a lot of people that will do it, and then if they have all this information and don't go and do these courses, certs, anything like that, it's just going to waste. And you stand out in that sense as well. Just before I forget as well, I just had another idea as well. To me, I think as well, having your own individuality definitely stands out for me as a recruiter. And when I say this, I appreciate that people coming into IT, you probably have some form of life experience. And I question whether that's going to be relatable. And I think if you've worked in the hospitality industry, like let's say a bar or in a restaurant, like we all know how full on that is, the massive hours that comes with that. So to me, somebody who works from in that type of background, they're people that I can actually kind of take a couple of punches, be quite resilient, and that's something that I do look for when I'm speaking to people. I'll also look for people who've either got a martial arts background, because I know that there's a degree of discipline involved with that, along with if they've worked in the Defence Force or been part of the Army. I think as well, other things which I tend to find quite interesting is, look, if you've gone overseas, you've backpacked, you've done that type of stuff. I think they're all things that make you, hardens you and gives you a different perception of life. And I think that definitely comes into play with troubleshooting and also communication. And it's just having those soft skills, knowing that. And that's the story that I like to tell when I'm speaking to the employers that I partner with. I know, having spoken to a few employers, they're like, mate, I love that this person's come from the military, because I know they've got that defense background. They're disciplined, they'll see it through. Another one actually said to me, I know this person would be great for our job because they've actually gone into a jail and their role was to actually supervise the inmates. And if you look at it like that, you're literally going into a shit environment each single day. Every day will be different based on obviously how the inmates go and that type of stuff. So you're constantly kind of firefighting. So if you apply that to IT support and that type of stuff, it's going to be a piece of piss for you. So it'll be like that is, compared to working in a jail, I suppose, quite more easier. And that's how kind of some employers will tend to kind of perceive those. So I think if you do have something that's not non-industry related, working in those type of industries, I'd still kind of make sure that you're bringing that to their attention or having that on your CV and that type of stuff. Around kind of like around trending roles and how it's kind of changed and what's changing and that type of stuff. Look, the biggest thing for me to kind of get things kicked off with is a lot of the time, IT techies are expecting to work from home 100% of the time or most of the time. I can see their point of view, because obviously you can get some stuff more done, better quality of life, you're less traveling, you're less spending money to go to and from work, that type of stuff. I get it. From an employer's perspective, look, they want people who can work in the office part-time at least. Usually if you're starting off in a new position, in a new business, they would like you to be there full-time for the first, 12 or so weeks, so you can get adapt to the processes, to the customer base, to their colleagues. It's really going to be there for your knowledge sharing. And I think if you're very much adamant of working from home 100% of the time, you're probably going to come in for a rude awakening. The reason being is that if I'm looking at what's going online at the moment, and even looking back in probably November last year, noticed a lot of C-level, so that's like your CEOs and those type of user group base, pushing for staff to come back in the office at least 2 to 3 times per week. Mainly it's going to be around the amount that they're spending for their real estate and that type of stuff, let's be honest. But that being said, yes, there are surveys and that stuff around culture, around knowledge sharing, and especially if you're coming into this, I suppose, infancy stage of your career, being in the office as much as possible is going to be much more beneficial to you. So just being aware of that. When I look at positions, I think anything and everything around public cloud, but also private cloud as well. There is still a massive focus around on-prem, VMware, Hyper-V, mainly due to various different reasons. A, it's cheaper, depending on who you ask. B, security. C, sometimes easier. But it's just being aware of, obviously, their paths for you to go down. And that's where you're kind of going, if we're looking on the right-hand part of the page, systems, network, cloud engineering. So you've got different levels. So if we, let's say, look at IT support, you get some really well-rounded understanding of what IT looks like, the landscape, the severity of issues and that type of stuff. And then if you want to go into, let's say, the second last dot point, you can go into systems, network, or cloud. And what you're doing there is you're working up into being a main escalation point. You might move into a project focus role. So it means that you're building out brand new environments. If you're in more the third-party managed services side of things, you would be potentially going to pre-sales. So it's not really sales, it's just being there to communicate where you can go, communicate in layman's terms your solution for the customer. And you get a bit of commission for that as well, generally. And you'll be doing primarily a lot of solutions architecture. Other areas that I've seen a lot of people go into off the bat, or even using IT support as kind of a breeding ground to be pushed into other areas. Definitely development, and I think that's a great one to get into. Some people don't tend to like it because it can be quite repetitive and you're just basically coding. DevOps is a great one, and that seems to be a very focus point ever since I got into the industry back in 2016. And I think if I'm looking at salaries, back in 2016, 110,000 was kind of the average average amount wage for that type of role for an intermediate. Now I'll be probably seeing 140 as a minimum for an intermediate, and if I'm looking at a senior, I've heard of ones asking for 200,000 plus super here in Brisbane. Data is a great space, ever evolving, especially in the Brisbane market. It's hit our market, I'd probably say, the last couple of years. Project management is another area to go down, especially the BIBA path. Cybersecurity, we've all seen the news, guys. Cyber's a huge one to go down as well. And cyber, historically, from what I've seen, a lot of people come in from networking, but I've seen a lot of people come in more recent years from cloud and systems and that type of stuff. Obviously, if you're very personable and you're probably more focused around money, you could also look at IT sales as well. Around kind of the technology stacks and that type of stuff, or areas for you to focus on, look, automation's a big thing, especially around Power Apps as well. And speaking to a few of my clients in that managed services area, Power Apps is something that they're going to be heavily focusing on in the next couple of years. If I look at every single support engineer, systems administrator style of role, especially when it comes down to being a Windows system admin engineer versus a Linux, everyone's talking about Office 365. So if you're getting some decent Office 365 experience, it's definitely going to be to your advantage. And I'd say it's going to continue to do so for a while as well. Experience and qualifications. So, look, this is more just to be kind of what to be wary about as to coming into IT, especially in the support function. Customer service is going to be a big thing. Once again, if we're looking at managed services, the reason why this is going to be so important is a managed services provider. I don't know if anyone's here who's watched Suits or any legal shows. You got billable hours. An MSP traditionally has billable hours. So that's basically what you work, you charge out for time-wise, and that's how they make their money. And there's not a bad thing about it, because if they're doing it properly, they're reinvesting the money back into their staff. I'm all for it. Some people get a bit concerned about it, and I think if they're doing it to screw over their customers and trying to make as much money as possible, but the customer's not coming out with a good outcome, I don't agree on that. But that being said, from a commercial side of things, if you've got good customer service, that's going to be important, especially in the managed services, because you're going to be resolving issues, but you're also going to be providing a great customer experience. And that's what they're paying for. In an internal environment, some environments unfortunately see IT as a cost. So if you have good customer service as well, providing solutions, it's not going to be as much of that cost. When we look at if you've got a problem, come up with a solution, I think that's quite a big thing, because a lot of the time, obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on, but if you can kind of go above and beyond and bring a solution, whether it's to the end user or whether it's to your escalation, kind of say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. I think this is the best way. I just need to kind of use you as a sounding board. It just makes it a lot more easy for you, and I think that's where you learn a bit more as well. But just remember, and this is quite important, around the tone of voice. you can be correct and you can have the right answer, but how you frame it and how you say it can make a massive difference. And I've seen from time and time again, both in recruitment, but also dealing with engineers and managers, the wrong tone of voice, even though they're right, will be taken completely different, and they'll be like, well, I don't care, I'm not listening. So it's imperative to make sure that you're aware of that. When I look at troubleshooting experience, this is quite unique. So I think in this day and age with technology, we can find an answer predominantly quite quickly, especially in AI and that type of stuff. The concern that I've started seeing probably in more recent years is that a lot of the troubleshooting and what you do and why you do and how you get there tends to be forgotten or it's missed. So it's almost like it's not as valued to a person, but to an employer, they want engineers to come in with their own playbook. So a couple of the roles that I'm recruiting for at the moment, this is somebody as a senior systems administrator or a systems engineer level. And what they're looking for is people who know how to troubleshoot. So if there's issues and they're quite complex, going through every single thing to make sure that they're not applying a band-aid fix or the issue is going to come up again. And that's quite a unique skill set to have. But at an interview, that does tend to come out as to what things that you do to resolve an issue and how you go about it. So I think that is quite unique and key to have for any person in IT. When we're looking at qualifications, so this is where I was saying before about more your industry certs and that type of stuff. ITIL version 4, that's a pretty good one to have. And I think that's more going to give you guys an understanding of severity of issues and how tickets work and basically where it all fits. So if you're familiar with SLAs, service level agreements, that all comes into play there. I think for anyone coming into that, IT support, system engineering, even DevOps, it is quite it's quite a benefit tool and also cert to have. It's essentially a framework, and I've even spoken to managers who manage a system engineering team or network engineering team or even DevOps engineering, and they're like, I really like this candidate because they've come from a service desk background, so they understand and appreciate the complexities that come with troubleshooting, and if they were to make a switch, will that have further ramifications? Quite often I tend to hear, especially sitting in the infrastructure side, devs will kind of write some code, push it out in production, there's no testing, and all of a sudden shit breaks and there's a massive firefight. Having somebody from that service desk background that kind of understands severities and that type of stuff is quite beneficial. So if you haven't, definitely look into it. The CompTIA A+, I tend to find is quite another good fundamental course to complete, and that's quite across the board as well. I'd say that's almost on the same level from what my understanding is of like your Cert 3 or 4 in information technology, something that you get with a registered training provider like a TAFE. When you I feel that when you've got some of those under your belt or some understanding of them, so you can do courses, just means that you haven't sat the test, you probably want to look at something more vendor related. CCNA is a really good one because I think that's quite well rounded around networks, the concepts and how that all works. And thinking about that now, actually, a lot of the managers that I've been speaking to in the last couple of years mentioned to me the severity of networks versus cloud. Cloud's very sexy. Everyone wants to hear about it. It's very sleek. So naturally, everyone's going to start focusing their attention there for self-preservation and making sure that they're locking in their careers. What tends to be forgotten is networking and networking skill set. So it's not being a networking admin necessarily. It's just more or less having an appreciation and understanding of how networks work. More the concepts and that type of stuff. But a CCNA is obviously a starting path. You've got a few different variants of CCNA, which I think is security. The main one would be routing and switching would be a good one as well. Obviously, when you're going down the cloud path, you'd be probably looking at, most of the time, everyone tends to go with Azure. I think they're pretty much leading the cloud wars at the moment from what I'm seeing. And if you're looking at a lot of job ads and that type of stuff, Azure is definitely being asked for heavily. It's more or less when you're looking at more maybe the DevOps scene, especially around the fintech side of things, it's more going to be AWS Alliance. That being said, if you get a bit of both, even better. Different technologies work for different environments, but essentially they have very similar tools. So you've got a couple of links there. Microsoft Fundamentals, you can get it for a few different ones. So there's automating administration with PowerShell. Unfortunately, my colleagues didn't put the other ones in there, which is Office 365, and then there's an Azure one as well. That's something that might be a good way to have a look into them. With doing some of these courses, and you can even get your certs from that, so it's just by sitting the test and doing that. But essentially, if you want to go and start using things like Udemy or LinkedIn Learning, there's another one as well, Plural. They're all good sites to kind of give you some fundamental knowledge. They're all kind of online courses. Some of them will get you to set up test environments as well, and they're not overly expensive. So the $1 million question that you guys will probably be asking yourselves, I know myself reflecting back, trying to get into recruitment, and I was like, how the hell do I get the experience when no one's willing to give me a go? I think when I look at it, especially for IT, what separates the boys and the girls from the men and the women, it's more going to be about what they do outside of business hours to actually really bridge that gap. So like I said, service desk is a great starting point, IT support. That being said, it can be sometimes misconstrued that it is just an entry point into IT. Not necessarily the case. Every service desk is run very differently. Some are run where it's very triaged and segmented. So the first point of contact will just do some quick tick and flick, logging, basic troubleshooting, move on. Next person will pick it up, do more troubleshooting within the SLAs, then they'll push it through to the final escalation point if they can't get it done within then or don't have the permission rights. Others will basically, especially in a managed services environment, will have somebody who has more experience that will try and be that first call solution, resolve the issue in the first call. But then they've got it broken down into other kind of areas that they can push into as well. So it's being aware of what you're applying to. Every service desk role, support role looks very different. I'd be kind of looking out for like more junior, or if it's mentioning like graduate or that type of stuff. If you've got a job in IT already, or you've got some form of experience, you can go above that instead of just relying on doing your job. A lot of the time you can actually ask for read-only access, so you basically go behind the scenes and see how things have been actioned. And obviously, if you get an understanding from a conceptual point of view as to how things happen, at least you're much better off than not knowing, and that's when you can start to apply that and make changes. I think as well, a lot of people need to be shadowing other seasoned operators. And that just starts by putting a hand up and asking for help. Hey, mate, this is where I'd really like to go with my career. Can I sit next to this person? Can I ask them? I'd just like to kind of just see how they go about their role on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, when you're in bigger businesses, it makes it a bit more easier. You might need to give back time. So you might take an hour or two maybe per week to kind of sit with somebody to do that, but you still need to do your job. There was somebody who I met a few years ago. They're working at a bespoke application support environment. And they really wanted to get into traditional Windows support and go into that system administration path. And this is kind of focusing around the third last dot point, asking to moonlight in that area. So he was able to shadow some people to start off with. Then he's moved into that area, I think, a day per week. So he was quite lucky, didn't have to kind of owe the hours back or anything like that. So he got to basically go at his own pace. And then basically he's made the transition there afterwards. Took a little bit longer, but he got that experience, especially internally, which worked out quite well. I think as well, play with different test environments at home. There's so many people that will create stuff at home, tinker with new technologies, hardware, software, whatever it is. But to me, when an employer hears that, they're willing to go above and beyond. And they're actually they're trying to change, not just basically hope that they're going to learn it on the job, which isn't always going to be the case. If you have the opportunity to play with test environments at home, 100% do that. Getting a mentor as well, it can probably be something a bit similar to shadowing a very seasoned operator. It might be somebody outside of the business as well. I think where it goes into this, the last point of attending networking events and meetups, if you attend those type of things, great way for you to meet new people, but you might be able to learn and I suppose meet your future mentor there as well. People are always happy to help other people, especially in those type of events. So sites like Eventbrite and meetup.com, they're great places to basically look for either user group meetups or actually networking events specifically as well. So just keep that in mind as well. If you can get the opportunity to do that, I'd 100% recommend. And then it's mainly being patient. I think a lot of people tend to want to make a move very, very quickly and move up and move up. And what tends to happen is that when they move up into very seasoned or senior roles, I should say, they've got more of a target on their back. So if they're not performing and they're getting paid a decent amount, they might get pushed to the side. They might get redundant. I've seen that happen before. So it's more or less being aware of, is the next move for me, is that going to be in my best interest for my career? Am I going to be able to actually fast track and be better in my career in the next couple of years, or is it going to stunt it? And I've seen people that move for a bigger and better opportunity, but there's a lot more of a jump for them. They tend to basically drown, and then they complain about that environment. They move into the exact similar position somewhere else, and it happens again and again. And eventually, hopefully, they do all right. But there's a lot of stress and a lot of branding potentially tarnished during that process as well. So if you stay at the same environment, or if you make a move instead of staying at the same environment and they're offering you to do more opportunities, but you know you're going to be limited around support, you just need to think, what's going to be the best thing for me in the next couple of years? Staying, going, moving, whatever that looks like. And that's pretty much it, guys. I suppose I do know that David mentioned around salaries, and it can be quite broad. I think if I'm looking at, I only focus in the Brisbane market, that's all I want to do. I don't want to really kind of focus in Sydney, Melbourne, or any of those places. I do know when you look at more the capital cities in Sydney and Melbourne, you're probably going to be on a higher amount than what you would in Brisbane, and that's just based on cost of living is a bit more higher down there as well. But if you're looking in Brisbane, look, a support engineer will earn anywhere between, I'd say, roughly 60K up to probably around 80-ish K plus super. And that's across being like a traditional level 1 up to a traditional level 2 skill set. If you're starting to be that almost system administrator, you're probably going on that 80K and above. A managed services systems administrator or a level 2 would basically be on anything from, I'd say, 80 going up to maybe 100K at the moment plus super. A traditional systems administrator will be anywhere from, I'd say, 90 up to maybe 120, just depending on the complexities of what they're dealing with. Are they a final escalation point? Some of them will be on 130K and they might take on some more project work. It also depends on the environment, how many clients you're supporting, how many servers, that type of stuff. When I look at project engineers, so these are people who deliver, you'd be probably looking at anywhere between 120 up to 150K plus super. Once again, depending on the size of the business. It'll also depend on the technologies that they're across, the complexity of the projects that they're delivering as well. I think if you're more asking for the higher end, especially in the SMB market, you're probably going to be doing some form of pre-sales and solution architecture. Where if you're looking at the enterprise level and you're looking at working for one of the big managed services, you're probably looking at around roughly the 140K, if not maybe going up to 160K thereabouts. And then if you're doing just pure or primarily focused around pre-sales and solution architecture, you're probably going to be on anywhere from, I'd say, 160 to 190K plus super is what I'm finding. Outside of that, we've already covered off DevOps as well. And then the other areas, look, I don't focus on those, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. But any questions at all?
Yeah, there's a few questions. Thanks for that presentation though. Before we get to the questions, that was very good and very enlightening. And I know a lot of those, everything that you said is 100% true from my experience working at different places. It's exactly like you said. The first question that we had through was in relation to the format of a CV/resume and how that should be sent through. Is asking, should we use CV format in a PDF or Seek and LinkedIn? Mention keywords on CVs to bypass ATS.
Yeah. Okay. Behind an ATS is a human being. So bear in mind, keywords can be quite good, but they also can be a kick up the ass as well at the same time. To give you guys perspective is I've had a few people in the past where they mention a very unique skill set, a unique technology. I needed to kick up the ass because I probably didn't even notice it, but my client did, and they're like, hang on a sec, mate, they've actually mentioned this. That's quite unique for this person. And they press into it, and the person's like, oh, like I read about it once upon a time and I chucked it in there. And I'm like, yeah, mate, you probably shouldn't have done that. You want to kind of have keywords that you're quite associated with, primarily around technologies. Around the formatting, I would probably recommend, for recruitment agencies, definitely Microsoft Word, because what we tend to do is we tend to put our own brand on it. We work our cover page, we have our logo and that type of stuff. Some people have very complex PDF versions of their resume, and it's an absolute shit show for me to reformat. Once again, guys, like I'm not the most intelligent person in the world, but that being said, like I'm not a very technical person either. And so if I'm getting somebody to actually send a CV via Word, it makes my life a hell of a lot more easier.
Yeah.
Are they curious as well around how to actually format the CV as in like start to finish?
I think more
Or was
just
that another part of the question?
the
Or?
file extension of the CV itself.
Yeah, I'd say definitely Microsoft Word. Look, if you're sending it to an employer directly, to like a company that's advertised on Seek that's not a recruitment agency, I'd probably do it through PDF. The reason being is that it comes up a bit more crisper, a lot more clearer. So every time I'm sending a CV to a partner of mine, I'm literally sending it through PDF.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough. Next question was, are the days of walking into companies with a resume asking for a job gone now? Or are we in the era of being funneled into an online application only? I've got a bit of insight into this one, which is that you can still walk in if you want, but if you want to apply to a company that's actually looking for someone, I mean, they're advertising, they're paying to advertise online to promote that position that they're looking for. So I mean, I'd still apply online, and it's sometimes it can be a bit of a numbers game as well, depending on your experience and how marketable you are. But I don't know if
Definitely.
Gareth had anything more to add to that one.
It depends on the type of business, and it depends on the type of role. If I'm kind of thinking quite broadly, Riley, my talent scout, he actually walked in, and I thought that was pretty ballsy. And I'm like, that's quite relatable because you're in recruitment, you're constantly just reaching out to people and having conversations. So that to me is a massive standing out of the crowd moment. I think if you work in like the marketing or businesses that are very creative, I think that is probably not a bad shout as well. That being said, you might be perceived as a bit intrusive by just rocking up out of nowhere. It just depends because human beings, we're very unique. Some can be very sensitive and what's the word in this day and era?
Bit like deer in the
Snowflakes.
headlights. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
snowflake.
And other people were like, oh, look, that's really cool. Awesome. No problems. Like we weren't expecting that. And all of a sudden you've got your point of differentiator. You are remembered by that. I think whatever you prefer to do, definitely make sure that you're doing the follow-up and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But I actually think it's really cool people walking in. I just don't tend to see it that often. But once again, it depends on how busy that person is and is it going to be perceived of, look like this is a bit intrusive, might be perceived that way.
Yeah, I think from the places that I've worked in IT, I have seen a few people walk in And there was, I remember one guy specifically who was probably not dressed for the job that he was walking into, which was a bit of a shame because it was kind of interesting to see him sort of come in, but he was sort of talked about as soon as he left as being like, who the hell does this guy think he is? But at the same
Yeah.
time, there was another guy who walked in who ended up getting a job. I think he applied online and then walked in to, follow up instead of calling because he only lived just around the corner. And that guy got the job, but he was both good at the job and well presented. So it was a little bit both sided there.
That's a good example. And it's also it's the messaging behind that. So I presume that person's dressed the part and was really articulate. The other thing as well is, once again, we talked about that tone of voice before. So it's just more or less like, hey, I'm sorry, I hope I haven't intruded. Thought I'd be a bit cheeky. I just wanted to kind of just drop in. I was in the area. I just wanted to see if anything was happening. Or like, this is where the ass kissing comes into it a little bit. And I've seen this happening more in the marketing side of things. You see it come up on LinkedIn. Drop them off some donuts or something like that. Have your CV on the top as well. No one's going to say no to free donuts.
For sure. I remember the job that you got me not that long ago was on my first week, I brought in these sandwiches. I was like, I'm going to get brownie points straight up. So I brought in.
What a kiss ass.
Yeah, yeah, worked though. I mean, people were asking about those sandwiches for years afterwards. Like, oh, Dave, you're going to bring in these sandwiches again? They were epic. I'm like, yeah, probably not, mate. But,
Nice time.
yeah, probably not. But
Yes,
we've got
100% agree. I think that's a good idea.
I know you've got other commitments to get to, so I'll get through these next questions
No, that's
quickly.
okay, mate. I've actually booked a little bit of extra time, so that's fine.
Okay, cool. Next one was someone says they're very new to the whole field, so apologies if this isn't the most original question. Just wondering if on your own opinion, how you could naturally progress from help desk technical role into cybersecurity. Is this a reasonable step up from help desk to cyber, or would it be more reasonable to transition more gradually?
Yeah. Okay. I haven't seen too many people come from like the help desk into cyber straight off the bat. When I've worked with some good operators in the past in cybersecurity who are no longer in our business, unfortunately, I think the market's changed a little bit since then. But from what I gathered, cyber is very hard to make that transition into, and it is very niche. And I was kind of told that you need to be embedded in the community. So attending those events, and I think it was like hackathons one. They have hackathons, and there's Hack the Box and that type of stuff. And I think being being in the mind to other people when opportunities come around, just taking the opportunity when you got the chance as soon as possible. I think obviously doing certs and courses will definitely help you along that way, but it's just being really ear to the ground, knowing when things come up. But historically, what I've kind of seen people move into those security-based roles, it is more that they've gone into networking and managing firewalls, and then made a move into cyber, or they've gone into like system engineering cloud, and then they've made a move into cyber. The only other thing is that in some businesses, they'll do a flare of cybersecurity. So that's, I don't know, do they code with a cyber mindset? Do they do things with a cyber mindset? Some businesses, especially managed services, will do the essential 8, and that's about it. They don't really do the pen testing or the real nitty gritty cyber stuff. I think if you were to work in an internal environment, or a bigger MSP that actually has an established cyber arm, you'll have a lot more, I suppose, success in kind of being promoted internally, I'd like to think. So if you look at like a company like CyberSec, for example, massive enterprise, and they target more that space, and they have obviously your managed services, but I like to think people are kind of being pushed into other areas, into comments and that type of stuff. But you'd also be probably a good person to mention as well, David, as to what that looks like, because you're obviously probably more focused on that cyber part than I am.
Yeah, it's basically what you said. Sysadmin and especially network engineering definitely moves into cybersecurity much easier than service desk or help desk or whatever you want to call it. Saying that though, it's not impossible, and it is again based off a lot of the time who you're talking with and how you're presenting yourself and what sort of certifications you want to get that target those positions. So I know CyberSec as a good example, they only hire pen testers who have an OSCP. Even with no prior experience as a pen tester, they will still bring you as a junior pen tester for a job as long as you have an OSCP certification. Getting that OSCP, though, you do need to have prior knowledge on things like networking and systems administration. So having, if you don't have any sort of avenue to get that experience, then building home labs or practicing those things on your own is a way to gain that experience. So, and of course, completing the labs of the OSCP to then get the certification to then get the job. So there's different stepping stones and pathways, and as part of our membership, we do a one-on-one coaching session with you to lay out a plan of attack to get into the industry. If you're interested in getting into pen testing or incident response or even GRC type roles, it's we have those sessions in there to sort of guide you on exactly the pathway that you should take that will help to get a job. On to the next question. How much of a gender gap has there been in the market lately?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics or anything like that there, but I do tend to see IT support. There's a bit more women in IT than there are in other verticals. I do tend to see more women come up in more the BIBA space, a bit more in projects. Where I don't tend to see as many women in is more around systems networking engineering, cloud engineering, DevOps especially. Dev, I don't know too much about. I know my colleague Kirsten, I think she was doing the Pi Lady, so it was like around a user group for women that code. But yeah, I tend to find across the board it's generally like I'd say maybe is it 80 or 90% where it's very male orientated to females. Obviously things are starting to change. You've got women in technology, and there's also like businesses are actually really focusing on also diversifying their workforce and making it easier and making it more better for women to enter into IT. I know that there are businesses that are actually KPI'd on how many females they have in a short list and that type of stuff. So there is definitely a push to improve it from what I'm seeing in the wider market.
Yeah, I've seen as well, especially on the service desk side, a lot more women coming into that sort of position as an entry point as well, which is great to see instead of, just a shop full of guys. It does depend on the organisation, of course, on who they're going to hire, but sometimes they do have verticals on. Like you said, they want to employ a certain amount of women to men, etc. So yeah.
I think it's more about ideas and kind of breaking down dynamics. I mean, people from different walks of life in one environment will bring in different innovation and ideas and change the dynamics there. So I think that can be quite a good thing.
For sure. We've just got one last question here, which is, does it help to have a GitHub and personal blog on your LinkedIn profile?
I think it does, yeah, 100%. Employees in the past that have actually, like some of them, I've kind of said, hey mate, FYI, here's a GitHub, and their blog. There's a guy in my mind that comes up to me straight away, and I'm like, hey, this is a link to his content, and they found it quite interesting. Others will actually find it themselves, and I didn't even know they had a blog, to be honest. I think it's always quite good. It's just more or less, once again, making sure that you've made the most out of that. So everything's done really well, nothing's done half-assed, because obviously if it's done half-assed or there's errors and that type of stuff, that's going to send red flags and concerns and that type of stuff.
Sure.
Rule of thumb, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I'd make a decider here that having it on your LinkedIn is a great idea. Having a link to your YouTube channel, for example, on your resume is probably not the greatest idea. based off that, sometimes, especially with that sort of content form, you can say all sorts of things that people may not like. Whereas if you link that on your LinkedIn profile as an example, I think that's probably a better route, because the LinkedIn profile is going to be a more professional, I guess, outlet for you to create content on. So if you just have a link on there saying that, I've got a YouTube channel as well, or this is a link to my Twitter or whatever socials you really want. I think writing articles on LinkedIn is great, and having something like a GitHub profile is also great, because it's usually either a blog on your thoughts of whatever it is you're working on, or potentially even just information on some sort of lab system that you've created and are passionate about. Sort of diving into the passion side here, I think, and you mentioned this right at the start of this presentation, but being passionate about the job that you're applying for and the industry that you're in is, I think, one of the most important things with getting a job. And sort of, because once you're passionate about something, it's easy to talk about, and it comes across a bit more genuinely than saying, like, if you think about dev and you're like, dev's cool and whatever, that's not going to sort of help you. But if you're actually passionate about the thing, and you build systems in your spare time, and you sort of talk about these things on your whatever socials that you've created, I think that's the key to success, personally.
100%. And like I was saying before, about if we're comparing ourselves to the rest of the market, you doing that, and actually it is shown at the interview or when you're speaking to people, compared to somebody who goes, oh yeah, I've thought about dev, yeah, haven't really done anything about it, or just, oh yeah, I don't know about where I can go in my role, yeah, just want to do IT. You're going to stand out of the crowd and
Exactly.
thrash the rest of the competition there.
Yeah, I agree. There's no more questions in the chat, which is awesome. So I guess I'll end this one here. Thanks for coming along and presenting. Cool. It's been great to hear from you, and to hear your voice again. It's been too long. We should catch up for a beer again sometime soon.
Definitely back when you're back, mate.
yeah, when I'm not out and about all over the place. So yeah, for sure.
Awesome. All right, mate. You stay safe, and we'll catch up at another stage. But yeah, thanks very much for having me on. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call.